Thank you for joining us today for planning effective pool design projects. My name is Sharon Fitzpatrick, and I am your host for today's webinar from Recreation Management. And this is sponsored by Neptune Benson. We have some great speakers, some great content. I think you'll all love it. And we have Stuart Isaac, Sherry Barnett, and Steve Crocker. At this time, what I'd like to do is introduce Emily Tipping, the editorial director of Recreation Management magazine.
Thanks, Sharon. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad to see you all here today. Happy to see how many people are looking at planning new pool projects. I saw a lot of people talking about therapy pools and therapeutic pools. I saw some splash pads. Those things are no surprise. We're seeing a lot more people looking to add therapeutic programming. Splash pads, of course, have been hot for a really long time. So we are excited today to have a team of folks to talk to you about how to plan effective pool projects. We are Recreation Management. We're a publication going to about 50,000 subscribers in print, but we also have a digital publication. We cover recreation management, aquatic management, parks, sports facilities, fitness facilities. If you are not a subscriber, I would encourage you to go to our website at recmanagement.com and sign yourself up for a subscription. But for now, let's talk about planning pool projects. So as you were registering for today's event, we asked you several questions about getting started with planning pool projects. We asked specifically how many of you are or are not planning pool projects. We ended up with about 60.2% of people, that's 147 of the responses that we had when we were gathering the information, who are planning pool projects. We can guess that the rest of you are thinking about it or maybe want to and want to know how to start. So that's why we're here. And then we also asked about what are the barriers to getting a new pool project going. Any guesses as to what the biggest one is going to be? I don't think it's going to be any surprise for anybody. It's going to be budget restrictions. Budgets are always a challenge. They're a challenge across the board. I think we had almost half. I think it worked out to 44.7% of the responses said that budget was their primary challenge in getting a pool project off the ground. Other things like selecting treatment technologies, choosing your design team were a little bit smaller, but those are of course issues as well. And then third, we asked where you're coming from. Are you the owner, operator of your facility? We also have some service folks in here, some sales folks in here. And that worked out kind of similar to the planning projects group, where we have 62.3% of our attendees today are facility owners, operators, and directors. So welcome. We're glad you're here. And we can't wait to hear what these guys have to tell us. And we're going to start with Stu Isaac. He's the president and founder of Isaac Sport Group. And then he'll be turning things over to Steve Crocker, principal and director of sports swimming at WTI. And we'll be finishing up with Sherry Barrett, regional sales director from Neptune Benson, to talk to us more about pool technologies. So without any further ado, I would like to turn things over to Stu to get us started. Stu?
Thank you very much, Emily. When we first started to put this webinar together, my topic was really funding the design study. How do we get to that point where we pass it on to Steve Crocker from Water Technology to talk about this? But as I saw some of the responses on the initial surveys, and certainly reinforced by the chats and comments you've already mentioned this morning, I really changed that to the planning process, planning for success, and what happens during that pre-design phase that really tees you up to have the most effective design study and design project. What do you need to do very cost effectively to get prepared to move to the next steps? So I walk through, in my mind, the process of what we see, and it always starts with a dream. I bet many of you out there, or many of your advocates in your community, have sat down, perhaps over a glass of wine, and sketched out on a napkin what they think their facility would look like. I did this as an exercise for myself just a couple of days ago to kind of get in the mood for this presentation. Many times you get to this stage, the dream, and you reach out to a water technology or any consultants in the business, architects, and you say, we'd like to build a pool. How do we engage your services? What can you do for us? And I get references all the time of these groups, the professionals, the architects, the designers, coming to me and saying, this group is not ready for us yet. They need to do so much work before we get to this stage. So that's where I'm going to talk about. And that includes identifying needs and opportunities, listening to the community, advocacy and stakeholders. You can see this, you get an idea, and we really get to that last element of funding that design stage. This whole process leads to building the community consensus, the will, and the knowledge to get to a point where you can justify spending the money to go into the more expensive design phase and really begin to move the project forward. So when I saw some of the comments of where do we start that came in across the chats, that was really part of this. When we start with just the dream or that reality, the dream, and think about turning the dream into the reality, that's a big step. I've attended USA Swimming's Build a Pool workshops, and they define the difference between a dream and a project as money. I prefer to look at it in a different way. I prefer to look at it in turning the dream into a logical progression of development. What is that development process? What is that roadmap? If you try to go from dream immediately to a reality, that's such a huge step. Sometimes your dream ends up looking like this pool I'm showing here, which is actually in suburban Philadelphia. And it was a pool that did not succeed. It did not justify its existence. It was a huge drain on the owner. And this is what the pool looks like today, with the Durafirm Duraflex board still in place, looking out over what is now a pretty expensive storage facility for this educational institution. Through this process, you're building credibility. To get to that funding step where you really are going into spending significant dollars on a design project, you've got to show you're doing your due diligence. Every step of the way, every element we're going to talk about builds credibility. Credibility about what you research, about your needs, about the opportunities, about the feasibility. And you're building credibility with your community, with your leadership or management, whether it's a public or private facility, and with the stakeholders and key user groups. All of these elements need to be on board to really justify ultimately this process. Every time you look at a feasibility study, even a design study, you always hear references to the needs assessment or needs analysis. That's a little bit of a myth to me, because let's say it can lead you into some directions that aren't productive. Often this looks at the current programs you're running, maybe the current programs in the community, and you try to fill out, okay, here where we have gaps, here where we have waiting lists, here are things local communities near us have, we don't have. And you kind of look at building to really be able to accommodate more of what you're doing. Often this leads to more and more of what we consider the same facilities. Also the same elements with demographics. You can find with demographics that often you'll hear in a feasibility study or hear in the industry media of how many pools you need per capita. We've seen this metric used in many studies. Often the vision is understanding sort of national averages on usage of pools, uses of sport program. There's a wealth of this kind of demographic data. And then of course you have your local demographic data, which you try to overlay those national averages. This in many ways leads us, while it provides some important starting information, it also leads to you envisioning or looking at doing something that meets national averages, which in most cases are not really best practice aquatic facilities. So we'll often talk about a market analysis addressing the local market, really understanding the local needs from your key constituents, but also market studies should look at best practice markets. That's very important. Also, when you talk about needs, I never mention needs in a study or an analysis or even in design without also mentioning opportunities. The images I'm showing here, and the one with the dog therapy pool, that's kind of to make sure you're all watching and looking at the pictures, get your attention. But we're looking at all the different opportunities, new trends in aquatics, new trends that Steve will talk about in the design component. But understanding that there's so many good things happening, so many things, new ways to utilize aquatics, and opportunities that many of yourselves, your local community, your local stakeholders may not realize what opportunities there are for recreational and leisure and competitive and family aquatic programs. So I never like you to mention needs without opportunities when you're really moving to your next stage of design. Every time you do a feasibility study, or you hear from city council, or even it'll be an element of any, the actual design process with the architect, we always talk about engaging the community. Now, this happens during those later stages, but it's really important to happen now. And I want you to think about these because it's very important leading up to that, even leading up to the feasibility and design study. It's very important to identify the naysayers early on. When you're just having open forums and you're getting people that are interested in the aquatic center, your stakeholders, you can get them to meetings and you'll hear all the positive things. But it's very important to identify the naysayers early, address their issues, and hopefully co-opt them into the program as part of the problem solvers. Also important to really understand how people are using facilities, the local facilities, where they go for their aquatics if they're not using your facilities, or if you don't have a facility, where are they going in local communities? The challenges ahead, I love to put these questions down because every one of these I hear now and again and again. And it's, I'm not a swimmer. I will never use the pool. Well, you've got to understand how broad the aquatic components and how it's not just the lap swimmer or the competitive swimmer that can use an aquatic center. I like the programs, but they're never offered when I can participate. Huge scheduling issue, which we'll talk more about. A competitive pool does not meet our recreational needs. I hear that all the time. A rectangular pool doesn't serve the full community. A real myth there and a misconception, but needs to be addressed early on. Here's one I hear all the time. I can never get a lap lane when the teams are training. Also, if we host events and swim meets, I'll never be able to use the pool on the weekend. The water is too warm. The water is too cold. There is never a time when the whole family can use the pool. Another important element. Now, if we move to the next slide, and I just see a comment about some of the kind of the phasing of this and how we move. We'll try to take that into account with some of the delays and connections.
We also, Stu, before you go on, we have a question too.
Okay.
Where did you find the statistic information on how many public swimming pools are needed per capita?
Oh boy, I see that in a lot of feasibility studies. To be honest, I know we have a couple attendees from Canada. I see it in many of the Canadian feasibility studies that I've reviewed. And often we see a number like, well, your community needs one pool per 30,000 population. I've seen other studies, and I don't know really how those numbers are developed, but they're out there in the market with some of the aquatic consultants we see. I've seen another study that, and this one I can't remember the exact ratio, but you need so many square feet of pool water based, per capita, per 1,000 of your population, things like this. Very misleading statistics that end up, like one community I know of, they have 12 pools, over 1 million population. They have 12 pools that really are all very similar. But what happens is they don't have the different kinds of water, the very warm water for therapy. They don't have really a competitive pool that can host events, not even 25-yard, not to mention 50-meter events. So it's very important. Again, that is, you can start from there saying, yeah, boy, based on our growth, we need more pools. Well, but it's what kind of pool, it's the types of water, it's the depths, it's all how that works together. And I believe Steve will talk a little bit more about that. We've looked at, I see one comment here about the NRPA, and we've looked at a lot of those different studies, and they only get you so far. You've really got to overlay the existing aquatic programs and the opportunities to that, because you'll find that they're often those statistics, I find, underestimate the opportunities you have for a local aquatic program and how to make a pool sustainable. Pools, and I like to talk about aquatic center versus pools, because you really need the multiple pools. I hope that shares some example. Now, back to move along through these slides, advocacy groups and stakeholders are very, very important. Sometimes I see organizations that view them as sort of the enemy, but they can really help the process and deserve a place at the table and a really liaison with the user groups. Use them. I know that it's a challenge with swim teams or competitive programs, because they're often the loudest at the table, very narrow interest. They want more pool time for less dollars, not really interested in sharing. But we've seen a lot of success where those people have opened up and broadened it with an overall aquatic advocacy group that may be a 501c3 and really bring it under the umbrella and gain a seat at the table for all the aquatic components under an umbrella advocacy group. And these are just some examples with past projects. When you're reaching out to the constituents, really important to reach all of these elements, whether it's the triathletes and the senior aquatic fitness therapy, but also the more aggressive levels now in aquatic fitness with much higher intensity, and certainly recreation like a dive-in movie, and I see the local swim team. Engaging them early leads to support and buy-in. Involving them with a seat at the table, pre-design and early in the process really helps you focus, build consensus, and prioritize leading into really formal and more expensive design. You see an image of a very detailed aquatic calendar. When we deal with partners, and more projects have partners, it could be a land partner, it could be capital funding, it could be a program provider, a user group, could be public, could be private. People often react when I show them a schedule like this saying, well, we're way too early for this kind of detail. This is the kind of detail that you can do very early on, because it helps manage expectations and quantify the needs and opportunities for your partners and user groups and stakeholders. It also helps drive the design. This kind of element leads you, in this example, all these different colors are different programs or different access. And this led us to really needing to fit all this, an 8-lane, 25-yard rec pool, plus a program and leisure pool, shallower, warmer water, and a therapy pool. This also helps drive your financial analysis that you may do in a feasibility study, because you can understand revenue and cost of staffing and management as part of this. Helps you manage expenses, expectations early in the process. I put the copy of the latest recreation management idea book because great resource, but it often draws from actual users and managers. Too many projects, studies, design studies, don't really engage with the people that are running your pools, the management. I know many of you are on this call at a conference last week, and I heard that from designer groups and pool contractors. It's very important, and it makes it easier and more efficient to early in the process engage your staff in the discovery phase, the feasibility phase, and the design phase. They are great resources and critical to the project. We talk about feasibility studies. Many of the things I've talked about fit into a feasibility study, but there are also, a feasibility study means different things to different people. Please, if you're looking at a feasibility study, understand really what you're trying to find out. Don't pay for what you already know. Address these challenges. Pool always lose money. Okay, well, what do we need to do to make that work? Will cost a fortune to maintain. Won't be able to, individuals ask, they won't be able to afford it. There's a never-ending fight for pool space and time. We already have a pool. Any of this early work should take a look at how a new pool will impact your existing pools, how you can manage programming. It understands with that schedule of how you can lay this out. All very important, because getting your partners with skin in the game and a seat at the table during this plan It's almost though I hate to use the word feasibility study. I like defining it in the title of a study with what you're really studying and focus. Like I said, don't pay for what you already know. Use it to find the answers to questions you don't know or need help with answering. Get some examples of studies of successful projects. We always see design samples when we're looking for a design team. Look at multiple examples of feasibility studies and see what is generic and what is really focused on the local market that you can build on for your local market. Again, your goal in this study is generating the support and the will to move to the next step phase, usually the design phase. That advocacy group, those partners, identifying levels of commitment. I say could versus would. I see people say, oh, we want to design this, we want this facility to host events. We want to be able to host this championship. Well, you have to study what would you host it? Is it realistic? Yes, you have the physical facility to do it, but would you really be doing it? I say take it to the bank. Your financial studies should be in advance of the design, strong enough and in a format that you could, as I say, take it to the bank. It could pass muster with the people that are analyzing your bond issues or to donors that may be contributing. All this leads up to justifying the cost of the design phase. And then that leads into selecting your design team, which Steve Crocker is going to talk about. But first, we have a trivia question for you. Here's a test your knowledge of pools around the world. Where is the deepest pool in the world? You have a chance to place your bets on this.
Great, you can do that. Your poll should have popped up and we've got just a couple of you answering. So right now, Russia's in the lead. So let's see where this actually is. And share the results and let you know that definitely Russia was #1. And looks like Poland 2, United Kingdom is 4th or no, last. Canada is, oh, wow, we're just all over the place. But let me tell you, you're all going to be a little surprised by what's going on because the answer is England, United Kingdom. The Blue Abyss is located in Cornwall, England. It's multi-level, 50 meters, and it's used for all sorts of interesting and cool experiments, for scuba diving, for looking at weightlessness with astronauts, and it's used globally. So that's the answer. At this time, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Steve and say thank you, Stu. And
yep.
Steve, it's all you.
We want you to know that in no way are we or Recreation Management suggesting that you build a 50-meter deep pool. I just want that disclaimer in here before we go on to Steve and talk about
I was
design.
thinking more a 48 meter pool, which is actually where the one in Poland is. That's the one that's #2 on the list. Good
Okay.
point. Thanks, Stu.
Thank you, Sharon.
Steve, it's up to you.
It's a pleasure, everybody, to be with you today. I'm Steve Crocker. I'm the Director of Sports Swimming at Water Technology Incorporated. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I've been doing aquatic consulting work for about 18 years. I've been lucky to be involved with a lot of really, really cool aquatic projects, from rec centers to water parks to my specialty is the design of world-class competition facilities. I have a background in competitive swimming. I swam on the U.S. national team, and I coached college and club swimming for many years. And today, I hope to share some insights about selecting a qualified design team for an aquatics project. Well, most projects start with the feasibility study, as Stu talked about, or a master plan that provides the guidance regarding the direction that a project eventually heads. Depending on those results, the next step is often to hire a design team. For an aquatics project, that team typically consists of an architectural firm, an aquatic consultant, as well as lots of engineers. You always have a civil engineer, structural engineer, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. The first step in hiring that team is typically to create and to put out a request for qualifications or a request for proposals. Navigating that process can be pretty challenging. So when you begin this process, it's always good to talk to your peers and see what's worked for them. Be sure that you're not writing your proposal. Be sure that you are writing your proposal so you can make clear apples to apples comparisons of the different design teams that you're considering. Some key things you want to learn about the design team. Do they have the adequate experience to guide your project? Is the team cohesive? Have they all worked together? Has the mechanical engineer designed an air handling system for an auditorium? So, and another thing, do their references? How are do they have strong references? And does their proposal fit within your budget? When a design team responds to a request for qualifications, their submittal includes no pricing of their services. But when it's a request for proposals, it includes the qualifications and the cost of their services. Whether or not you use an RFQ or an RFP likely depends on where you're located and the state and government authorities' purchasing laws and requirements. All right, the more information you can give as part of that RFP process, the better. Ideally, give the teams plenty of time to ask the critical questions, helps them tailor their proposals and assemble the best and the very most qualified team. Give plenty of time for the distribution of the RFP and give time for the proposals to ask questions, and then enough time for them to react based upon the clarifications that you give them in addendums. After your committee reviews the submittals and the packet, it's typical that they schedule interviews with the top ranked teams. The interview process should be an opportunity to meet those teams, to get to know each other, ask questions and engage with them as much as possible. Try to understand their process and what it would be like to work with them. Tell them what your expectations are and as well as your concerns. The more you can learn in an interview, the easier it's going to be to make the right selection. So whether you're evaluating the RFQ or the RFP or even the teams that interviewed, it's important to have a scoring system to grade and rank the firms. Generally, the selection committee scores the teams on some sort of a points-based system with several different weighted scoring criteria. Categories like the team's location and quality of their references, their experience, and even the fee are commonly scored. Think about what's most important to you and make sure you weigh it appropriately. Talking about the role of an aquatic consultant, it's primarily to listen and help you make educated and smart decisions regarding the aquatic facility. There are hundreds of decisions that will be made along the way, and many of them influence the long-term success of the facility. So it all starts with programming. Will there be a swim team using the facility, and what's the team size? How many lanes and how much time will that require? What instructional programs are going to be offered? What amount of space, what water depth, what temperature do they all require? What about locker rooms? How many will you need? Will you have team locker rooms, men and women? What about visiting teams? Community locker rooms, universal locker rooms, family changing rooms. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the USA Swimming's Safe Sport program, but they're really looking to have separation of all athletes under age 18 from the rest of the facility users. What's the deck size necessary for the daily circulation? What about the instructional programs, and the decks associated with that? Competitive events. Decks are even social space. Often you need to plan on having tables and chairs. How much space is going to be needed for the mechanical room, the pool equipment, the air handling equipment, the storage rooms, the classrooms, the meeting rooms? Even a lobby can be an important consideration to get sized right. Also, a pool consultant should understand the local soil conditions and how geotechnical challenges they can affect the construction cost of the pools. As Stu mentioned a little bit, understanding the operational cost of the swimming facility includes lots of factors. Staffing cost is one of the biggest ones. So can a pool design be improved to reduce the number of required guards? It can many times. Sure, that regenerative media filter has a lower operational cost, but how long will it take to pay for itself? Well, I think Sherry's going to clarify that for us in a few moments. The concepts that a pool designer develops are really, really important. Evaluating the different pool concepts, it's an iterative and very fun process. That those concepts have to be developed with a thorough understanding of the program and with the review of all the features that could be considered. They should reflect the current industry trends. They should comply with local codes, and they need to be within budget. We don't want to fall in love with the pool design that can't be built or permitted. Project development considerations have changed a lot in the last 10 years, but as you know, they've changed especially in the past 18 months. Some things we've learned recently that help keep facilities safe are here to stay, such like traffic patterns to allow for greater social distancing. It's no longer just water sanitation. It's surfaces and air. Here's one that really I couldn't predict, but it makes a lot of sense. I was talking to a couple of swimming coaches, two different coaches from two different teams that are both in Kentucky. They operate year-round swimming programs, and during the pandemic, their facilities were closed down. They were allowed to use outdoor facilities, but not indoor facilities. So they were very creative. They approached some outdoor swimming facilities, some seasonal outdoor pools, and decided that they were going to use those pools year round. And believe it or not, they swam into the teen temperature range in the dead of winter, and were very, very surprised and kind of pleased with the outcome. So that was really a shocking one for me. So I think that could be a trend going forward, is that outdoor swimming, even in cold climates, it could be a good consideration. What about material lead times that could cause construction delays? I'm working on a project where the building type was completely changed during mid-design to meet the critical construction schedule. What challenges are expected getting approval from the health department? That could take 3 weeks or it could take 6 months. If there are unusual aspects of the design, a good consultant will communicate ahead of time with the health department well before submitting for permit, because the goal is to be sure that it will be approved. You don't want to design a swimming facility around a retractable obstacle course, Ninja Cross, for example, and then have it get rejected by the health department. So we've been working with Ninja Cross to try to get kind of pre-approved and make sure that they're familiar with things like that in advance, because that can be a time-consuming process. So to be financially successful, most swimming facilities built today have multiple pools, and how these are configured within that space is critical. Should the pools be in one room or two? Some factors to consider are: what is the daily activity schedules? What are the air and the water temperatures? And is having two different air temperatures even important? What about acoustics? Can you run a swim meet at the same time that you have recreation swimming or therapy taking place? Many of the most successful design processes include time and the budget to tour other similar facilities. I strongly recommend this. You can learn what you like, what you don't like. You can ask questions about what works great and what they would like to change. Getting the aquatic support spaces right is also critical. The deck around the pool is a big one. It's a circulation for officials and coaches and athletes, but it also serves as a seating area for athletes. It's a social space, and it's commonly even a classroom. The deck should not be oversized, because every foot or two of deck costs a lot of money, but it also shouldn't be undersized. So next is, what is the right size and location of all of the pool equipment room and the meet operations room and the wet classroom and storage room, lobby, and maybe even a birthday party room. For the storage room, we always recommend identifying all the large components and placing them in the room to confirm that the allocated space is large enough. You can see there an example up above, in that it shows the lifeguard chairs and the lane line storage reels to confirm the adequate space. So next slide. There you go. So The upper left photo shows the meet day usage of a competition pool deck. You can see that there's three zones. You have a pathway along the pool edge for the officials, and in this case, even a lifeguard. And then you have the seating, typically the tip and roll bleachers that are used for the athlete seating. And then you have to have a pathway for them to get to their seats. So that's really critical. And the sight lines are very, very important in sizing your decks. You can see in that photo on the left, there's no way they're going to see that first lane. So a lot of considerations. Decisions regarding natural and artificial lighting are critical too in a swimming facility. There's a great benefit of having natural light, but doing it wrong can create terrible glare for spectators and lifeguards and just anyone who's using that facility. Lighting can be an affordable way to bring interest to a new facility though. For very little money, sequencing color changing LED lights in the water or in spray features or above the deck can make a facility really, really unique and interesting. The deck materials and the deck drainage methods are an important factor. You have to find the right balance between cost and appearance, durability, slip resistance, and cleanability. And a good aquatic consultant can help simplify those types of decisions. So we've talked a little bit about minimizing the staff required to keep the pool safe. Modern pools with multiple zones often require more guards than a single zone pool. We don't want to design a multi-zone pool that requires 3 lifeguards to observe 5 or 10 swimmers during low use hours. So designing a pool with pre-planned lifeguard locations is a good idea to help ensure that you can have safe and efficient operation. Another example is the design of a current channel or a lazy river. A current channel with multiple S-turns creates a lot more blind spots than a current channel with more straight runs. So from a staffing perspective, the best lazy river is shaped more sort of like a hot dog, I guess, just where the lifeguards can locate themselves and see down both of the lengths. It's a good thing that the play structure manufacturers are more focused on reducing blind spots. They've started using a lot more transparent, translucent panels. The photo here shows an overhead, a play structure as well as an overhead feature that take up very little space and create almost no blind spots. Is talking about water slides. Traditional water slides, they terminate into a large dedicated section of the pool it's 42 inches deep typically. The minimum user height for a water slide like that is 48 inches, which is 7 and 8-year-old kids, for example, are the youngest ones that can use that slide. For operation, there's a guard at the top who starts the riders, and there's typically a guard at the bottom to make sure that they exit safely. To minimize the staffing though, we see a trend toward more run out slides like you see in the top image here. With them, there's a guard at the top who can also see the finish. A guard specifically for the run out may not be required. You can see how little facility space this slide takes up, especially if the flume goes outside the building. Also, a thing that I love is that these slides can be designed to have a 42-inch user height, which allows the kids to use the slide like this 2 or 3 years earlier. So is your facility going to be themed? Is it simply selecting one of the basic themes that the play equipment manufacturers can provide at little cost, or are you going to do something more grand, custom level of theming? If you are, including a line item for that theming is especially critical early on in the budget so that it doesn't get cut later on. The critical decisions on the systems. How you treat the water and even condition the air are some of the most critical decisions that a design team can help you with. Both of these strongly influence the user experience and the operational cost of the facility. So what are the pros and cons of the different water treatment system? Well, who's going to be operating that equipment? Is it an experienced staff or is it an 18-year-old lifeguard? Should the simplest possible system, should it be that system, or will a more sophisticated system be considered if it has a lower life cycle cost? You want to have a neat and organized pool equipment room like this lower photo and you don't want it to look like the top photo with all the spaghetti type of piping. There are indoor swimming facilities around the country that nobody wants to go to because of the terrible air quality. Some of them are competition facilities where it's impossible for an athlete to perform at their potential. What can be done to ensure that your new facility will have great air quality? Well, we know bad water chemistry can lead to bad air, but we also know that properly locating the air supply, returns, and having low exhaust can have a positive effect on air quality. So to continue the conversation about the treatment systems, I'm going to pass it on to Sherry Barrett. But first, who remembers this very, very unfortunate situation that happened at a large swimming competition?
Answer the next question as to where they think this is. I think more people will know the answer to this than anything else. And I also want to just acknowledge that everybody said there is a bigger pool in Dubai. So that was not in the Guinness World Book of Records. So we'll have to go back and update it, but glad everybody really knows. So the answer is definitely Rio.
Why we do what we do. For me, it was about a love for water from day one, and my passion came at a younger age. Spending my summers in the local community pool, becoming a high school swimmer, being a swim instructor, and then finding a passion in how to improve water quality. Always wanting to leave a legacy to find a way to make things better today than they were yesterday. Listening, improving, and a passion for the water I love. So yes, is innovation important? Yes. To make us better today than we were yesterday by improving our guest and employee experience, by using our resources wisely to make a more sustainable environment, and in today's world of love. So yes, is innovation important? Yes. To make us better today than we were yesterday by improving our guest and employee experience, by using our resources wisely to make a more sustainable environment. And in today's world of COVID and a continuing battle against RWIs, to make sure we're doing the right things by keeping our pools healthy. The old rotary phone. There's a blast from the past. So when I was a little girl growing up, we had rotary phone, and technology sure has changed. Next slide. Because now most of our phones look like this. Next slide.
When was sand filtration invented? Does anybody know? We'll see whether or not we get some answers. This is a really smart group. We thought we were going to stump you, but right now I would say we are not going to stump you because most of you have gotten the answer correct. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And the answer was in fact 1827. So back to you, Sherry.
Okay, so absolutely 1827, actually 1829, it was a little bit more engineered and then kind of moved into the public pool system in the early 1900s. Next slide. So while the filter on your left is not as old as 1827, it's oddly similar to the basis of vertical sand filtration. The premise of a deeper sand bed, the longer and slower the water would flow through it, and the clearer the water will be. You can still buy a filter like this today. However, it definitely has its downsides. First and foremost, visibly its size. If some of you have these filters, you can attest to how much space it occupies. The second picture in the middle is a set of modern day horizontal sand filters. And while improving on space and making solid gains on filter efficiencies, such as length of time spent backwashing, and basically the ability to stack those filters, they're still considered water wasters and don't really offer that much more in improved water quality. So there must be a better way. And along came Neptune Benson and the Regenerative Media filters. So that's what you're looking at on the left. This was a big surprise to the industry. Completely different new filter with a new concept in filtration. Surface filtration versus depth filtration. So you can see technology has definitely changed over the past many years. If you look at the pictures with the orange handles, the lever valves, those are all manually moved and manually operated. While you look at the Defender on the right, and you can see that there is a control panel that looks a little bit more technical. So why regenerative media? This new technology, RMS for short, can produce healthier water while reducing your operational costs, wasting up to 90% less water, up to 50% less energy, take up 75% less mechanical space, and offer 95% better particulate reduction in counterpart to sand filtration, which is more like 30%. So let's talk about water savings, and let's talk about how this happens. Sand filters, as we know, backwash and backwash and backwash, wasting thousands of gallons of water each day and each time. Again, they're based on depth filtration using lots of heavy media. The water pulls in reverse back through the filter to fluidize the sand bed and loosen the debris. It sends this dirty water to the drain. Then the pool water has to be drained through the back, that was drained out through the backwashing process has to be added back to the pool, creating a vicious cycle of water wasting. Then comes the Defender, the RMF filter. No more backwashing. Let me say that again. No more backwashing. So the Defender operates on surface filtration, which is completely different than sand. By using a safe and environmentally lighter media, it's called perlite, which again is lightweight and has a high capacity for absorption, it allows the RMF technology to create a new and improved way to filter the pool. Now, instead of backwashing, we have this new process called bumping. The new technology does not send any water to waste, so nothing going down to the drain. Wait, yes, I did say that. No water to the drain. This technology captures the dirt and the particulate from the pool as it filters onto spring-wrapped coils, which you can kind of see in that little picture next to that pile of perlite within the filter. When the filter differential indicates the system needs to be bumped, it bumps the filter, reversing the water back through those tubes and pushing the perlite off into suspension. The perlite then recoats the tubes and is basically utilized again, kind of flipped over like a pancake, and able to capture more debris. How does it work? Here's a internal flex tubes inside of a Defender. It's in a clear shell to give you an opportunity to see what's going on. You just saw the media being expelled off the flex tubes. It is now back in suspension, and we're going to see it recoat the tubes. So that's actually what the inside of a regenerative media Defender looks like during its bump process. It's some pretty neat action that you don't normally get to see. So that's the inside of that filter. Why is that important? I'm telling you this to tell you another story. It's about an RWI, and it's from a bacteria called Cryptosporidium. This RWI will, as you know, shut down your facility, potentially make your bathers sick. It's a devastating blow to any operation, but can easily happen. Lost revenue, sick patrons, possibly bad press. How does using the Defender's RMF technology change this? Let's talk about microns of filtration. The naked eye can see down to about 40 microns. A sand filter can go down to a range of about 20 to 30 microns. So the easiest way for me to explain that is if you took two pillows off your couch and you hit them together, the debris that's flying in the air, that's about the size of the debris that's going to come out with a sand filter. A Defender can filter down to 1 micron. If you look to the chart on your right, you can see the smallest microns on there are red blood cells. And they really are in between 5 and 10 microns. So you can only imagine what that Defender has the capability to filter out and just how clear your water can become. But not only can your water become clear, but the Defender filter can remove 99% of that crypto-sized particle from your water, leaving you a healthy body of water behind. So although these pools are not side by side, if you can take a look at the water clarity difference between the two, the left is a sand filter, and you can see the underwater pictures about 15 feet from the wall. We placed those black and white targets for photography purposes so you could actually visually see the difference. Sand filter on your left, Defender filter on your right. So with improvements comes some expenses, but it's about way more than upfront filter costs, especially when we're in a design stage. We have mechanical space cost. If the mechanical room is smaller, it's less costly to design that facility. The operating weight. The Defender operating weight is about 25% of an equivalent sand size. Typically, that means a smaller concrete pad, additional savings. We've all seen with our sand filters, our really large backwash holding tanks. With the Defender, because you're not sending the water that way, it really just needs to handle the volume and a half of that tank in order to do that. Local backwash waste flow restrictions has a smaller restriction tank. Size of waistline to sewer. The Defender volume is so much smaller than what you would be pushing out with a sand filter during the backwash. There's a very good opportunity to reduce that line. Also, reduced sewer permitting fees, which is absolutely substantial. We've seen some costs completely offset by that. Let's look at what a small footprint looks like. If you look at the picture on the left versus the picture on the right, the picture on the left is those sand filters, those horizontal sand filters we looked at, and now look at the picture on the right. It actually is the same filter area, but look how tight it is on the left. And now look at how much space there is to work in that filter room on that remodeled design. Here's an example of some space requirements we can go through really quick. So if we had a flow rate of somewhere between 1,000 and 1,600 gallons per minute, the footprint required for sand filtration is 240 square feet. For a Defender filter, it's only 58. So that's a lot of cost savings, especially when you could be looking up to $300 a square foot right now for a mechanical room space. Technology's changed. Now our children learn on tablets. We didn't learn on tablets, we learned on a blackboard, and we all got messy and chalky and dirty and dusty. But their technology is completely different from what ours is. If we look at the advancements in even just the Defender control panel, top right, you'll see the original control panel for one of the Defenders. It was all push button cycled, but now if you look to the left, you can really see that tablet design, just like our kids are using. Very simplified. It offers, if you look closely, you can see red dots on that. That tells you what valves are closed. Green dots are representing open valves. If there's a problem with the equipment, it has the ability to notify you. It actually has the ability to link with your email and send you out a notification if there's a problem. So technology's come so far for us in integrating that technology into the filter system, making things a lot more. Quick look at our UV. UV of yesterday was much larger, much larger. As of recently, Neptune Benson Evoqua has released its newest wafer unit, which is on the right. You can see that. So it's taking that from equivalent of a 3-foot long unit down to the thickness of, let's say, 2 large pizza boxes to cover our largest bodies of water that we service. So it's really improved. Technology's allowed us to improve the filter room, improve the water quality, and move forward, creating a much safer environment in your pump room. We do provide a Defender cost system savings analysis, which is something that Steve really kind of talked about. We are seeing cost of sand filtration has been going up while cost of the Defender system has been able to maintain. That is improving ROI at this point on that. Overall ROI, there is a definite payback within a 10-year period of time. So it's certainly something we'd love an opportunity to take and present to you as far as if it's a project you're considering and you have choices in your filtration. You have choices as far as what is important to you. And we certainly will offer an opportunity to take a look at regenerative media filter and what it can do for your aquatic facility. In the end, these pools are side by side. On the left, pool A or pool B, which would you choose? Pool A is regenerative media, pool B is sand, and the difference is clear. Thank you. Thank you. We work very hard at Evoqua at Neptune Benson. Our motto is transforming water and enriching life. We are a very large corporation. We're certainly here to help you. We've been in business as Neptune Benson since 1956. And certainly have a lot of experience in the aquatic environment. If you have any questions, please refer back to the seminar. There's my information. Feel free to reach out, give me a call. Certainly willing to help you as far as design goes, as far as being specified for our products go, and getting you that cost savings analysis. Thank you.
This is Sharon. We're back. I know we've run a little bit long, but we have some great questions that people want to ask. So I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their cameras so we can see them and we can kind of get things going. So welcome back, Steve. It's nice to actually quote unquote see you. So wow. Thanks so much. Just want to make sure everyone is unmuted as well. So there's some great questions we have. One of the questions is, we've heard a lot about supply chain shortages and how it's impacted not only pools, but everything that we do throughout all of our businesses. Would you guys like to maybe talk about that? Sherry, why don't you go first?
I think one of the shortages that in aquatics that you're seeing across the board is if you're looking at a sand filter system, there's a resin shortage. So resin helps to produce fiberglass. So there is thus a fiberglass shortage. So it's really about knowing what you're looking for. Some of those costs have risen up to 24%.
That's a lot. Anyone else want to add a comment to that? We have lots of questions, so. Okay, well then we'll move on to the next question. What has changed with COVID-19? How has that impacted the pools and facilities both today, during the pandemic, and long-term? How would it maybe change how we do things? Well, Steve, why don't we start with you?
Well, I mentioned a couple of things. I really think a trend toward more outdoor swimming is a good one. And I swim outdoors in pretty cold weather, and it is absolutely amazing. So I think I think that line, it shouldn't just be Florida and California and Arizona. That line should begin to move north a little bit. And I mentioned a couple other things just in terms of treatment of the air, using like the plasma ionization type system to ensure that the air cannot contain harmful viruses and things like that.
Stu, what do you think?
Well, Steve, you highlighted some of the very important design and technology in the pools. And what we're doing kind of in advance of that, particularly working with the business models and things, we know that there are a lot of changes in the demands on staff, on perhaps outsourcing chemical cleaners or disinfectants, equipment needed, maintenance needed. We know there will be a lot of changes that will be ongoing. Also, how we manage a pool in terms of circulation and traffic that have both management and design components. We know some of these things may become code in the future, but certainly we know a lot of this is going to become best practices. What we don't know is, although we're getting there because of how long this has lasted, what may be the right decision. So when we're doing, let's say, a feasibility study, we're building in staffing and operating cost contingencies, knowing that, hey, this may be outsourced, it may be in-house. There are different ways to solve these problems that we're still learning about, but we want to make sure that we built in a contingency, and we're using both that operational budget contingency and staff, as well as design contingencies.
Yeah. Sherry, any comment, or I'll move on to, we have a couple more questions.
No, go right ahead, move on.
Great. So this goes back to something that Steve said about outdoor pools. We talked about the one in Buffalo, which was in chat, but how do outdoor pools maintain swimmer comfort in cold weather? I'm getting cold just thinking about it.
You know, once you're in the water, if the water is a good temperature, you can be fine if the air is cold. You know, you tend to breathe much better in indoor facilities, which is great. So things like having a warm place to change is critical, and perhaps even some radiant heat on the deck between the changing and the water. But that's really the only place is that it's uncomfortable, and it's such a short period of time that it's not.
I would add to that, make sure your deck is not too slippery, because the swimmers are going to run real fast from the warming up to dive in the pool. Steve and I were both coaches. We know how tough it is in the coaches. They're the ones bundled up, freezing their butts off on the deck. But we see it often. And again, COVID has certainly accelerated that process.
You know, that brings up another good point. Some people feel that they're now looking at outdoor pools and trying to maybe enclose them temporarily or otherwise. Is there a northern limit, or do we still use bubbles, etc.? Anyone want to take that one?
You know, it does come down to operational cost. We're seeing fewer and fewer air supported or bubbles. But we are seeing, you know, the fabric type structures with a frame, you know, in pretty cold climates, even in Canada. So they can be designed, you know, to be very, very efficient from a thermal standpoint.
And keep in mind that, yes, you may move to more outdoor pools, but it's really driving, as Steve said, and as Sherry mentioned, to really look at making sure your air quality and water quality are top notch, because that will really help reduce any potential for future pandemics or other airborne viruses or any problems. And so you've got to take this all into account in how you make your indoor pools better too.
Well, as a old competitive swimmer, let me tell you, I appreciate that. I don't know how many times I probably in my brain have grained that smell of chlorine to the point that, oh, absolutely. So it's a good way to do it. I think we only have time really for one final question or comment. So the question is, why do you have to have multiple pools instead of one just giant pool? You know, what's the pros and cons? Steve, why don't you answer that one?
Well, it really, in one pool, you can have all the depths that you need. You can have all the space that you need, but it's really hard to do everything in one water temperature. I've taught a lot of swimming to little kids, and I've coached a lot of swim team practices with adults and older people, but the temperatures requirements are just totally different. If you know, the swim team wants 80-degree water, and if you try to teach young kids swimming lessons in 80-degree water, it is absolutely miserable for them. So that's the main challenge. Now we have done a single pool with 2 different temperatures by using an insulated bulkhead type system, but there's costs associated with that. So most of the time, because of scheduling and things like that, it makes more sense to do multiple bodies of water.
Yeah, I can imagine if you're in like a swim team practice, and I can just go back to my coach, who probably you could hear 5 towns over, if he's now competing with the little kids or even some of the senior aquatic fitness classes, they just don't go together. Then you need to be able to focus. So, you know, that's a good point. Sherry, any final words from you?
Just as you're looking forward, if you're looking forward to a design, if you're looking forward to that, I think it's always important to know what your equipment is and what's being designed, why the designer's making the choices that they are on the equipment that they're choosing, and making sure it really fits your needs. Steve can probably speak a little bit more to that.
Maybe also too, I want to have that, but I also want Stu to talk about the fact that you mentioned earlier that in the pandemic, we weren't prepared, but now we're putting end of the earth type contingency plans and planning into the feasibility and everything else. So if you can kind of both talk to that as well, that would be great.
Thank you, Sharon. In my presentation, I talked about the importance of having the maintenance and the operational staff and the programming staff in the design process and even the feasibility process. They are really the experts in understanding how these things have changed. So they live it every day. So that input is critical. One thing that I reach out to Steve when he and I are talking or working together on a project, often Steve or other aquatic designers or architects will get a question about, boy, we've got this dream, help us out. And Steve will pick up the phone and tell, hey, these guys aren't ready for us. They are not ready yet for this phase. They're not ready for water tech as their, in their services. Can you help them? That's what I want. And I always, when you're talking to a designer or an architect, make sure you're finding out the kind of things that you can do before you get to their stage, because it'll reduce your costs in the long run. It'll make it a more streamlined process. And Steve, that's something I know you and I talk about. A lot of people come to that and they're just not ready for that next stage yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, final word, and then we'll let people go since we're running about 15 minutes long.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Stu brought up a couple of good points. We think it's a good idea to have a feasibility consultant that doesn't have other interests. It's a good idea for, if the feasibility consultant says this is what you should consider building, and by the way, we would like to design it or maybe even build it for you, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest. So keeping that separate, like when we work with Stu, is a really positive thing, we think.
I think that sounds great point. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. This has been great. We really enjoyed it, and we will definitely be in touch with contact information for our speakers, as well as a copy of the presentation, a link to the recording. We want to thank you today and have a great, amazing rest of your day. Thank you, guys. You were great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.